My son, ask for thyself another kingdom, for that which I leave is too small for thee.
Welcome to the Chapter 4 overview, Eurasian Empires, 500 BCE to 500 CE. Here's the main idea for the chapter. During the classical period, major Eurasian empires ruled over diverse populations, managing them in a variety of ways while fostering commercial, cultural, and political exchange. This chapter is about how and why the early civilizations discussed in Chapter 3 in many places continue to grow into great empires. Most of the people throughout history have lived under rulers who were different culturally than they were. And this brings up a lot of questions that we still face today. Who decides who rules? What are the most effective forms of government? How can large countries like the United States govern larger and larger numbers of people? Here's the United States Supreme Court building, which is one of the ways that we govern people. It's also a reminder of the cultural influence of Greek and Roman culture, and this building is inspired by Greek architecture. So many of the answers to these questions during the classical period are still relevant today, and indeed used in many places today. Setting the stage. So remember this map from Chapter 3. These were the first 6 civilizations, and in some areas they evolved into massive empires, and the book will call these second wave civilizations. For instance, in the Mesopotamian civilization here, this is going to become the Persian Empire. Over here in China, you have 2 dynasties, the Qin and Han. And over here in the Indus Valley, you have the Mauryan and the Gupta empires. And you'll also learn about empires centered around the Mediterranean here and inspired and based in Greek and Roman culture. And the big question to remember in this chapter is, how did these empires manage to rule so many people? The key phrase is techniques of imperial administration, and this is something to look for and take notes on when you read. First, the Persians and the Greeks. Emerging from separate cultural and political traditions, Persian and Greek civilizations had a series of significant political and cultural encounters during the classical period. First, the Persians. Early monarchs named Cyrus and Darius helped to found by conquest a massive empire by around 500 BCE, shown in orange on this map here. For Persia, their main methods of imperial administration were religious mandate, a bureaucratic system using governors called satraps, religious tolerance, and economic measures such as coinage, canals, and roads. On this map here, the royal road is shown in red, and this helped to unite economically the large and diverse empire. The power of the monarch was also reinforced with monumental architecture. The Greeks were almost the complete opposite of Persia. The geography made unity difficult for them, and Greek culture consisted of hundreds of city-states, Athens and Sparta being 2 of the famous ones. So you need to realize that Greece is really an extremely diverse, fragmented, competitive culture, and again, these independent city-states. In fact, the original Olympics were designed to bring unity to this diversity. So Greek culture is a loose series of settlements with a common basis, shown in orange here. The most important political contribution from Greece was the notion of democracy, and the book will explain the various forms of citizen participation in matters of the state used by Greeks. This is definitely a big contrast with the absolute monarchy of Persia. So, the Greco-Persian Wars. The expanding Greek settlements, shown back on this map here, where it says Greek colonization in this reddish-orange color, led the Greeks to be in direct conflict with the Persians by around 500 BCE. Led by Athens, Greek forces won a series of battles, and there were major effects on Greek culture and the world. So in this map, we have the Persian Empire in orange, we have the Greek opponents of Persia in blue, we have neutral states in gray, and we have a state called Macedonia here in yellow. And it's hard to see, but there are some crossed swords that represent the major battles. The famous Battle of Marathon, for instance, happened during the Greco-Persian Wars. So what the book will explain, in addition to telling you why the Greeks managed to improbably win this war, is that this conflict created a cultural divide between East and West, which persists to this day. It made Athenian democracy more radical, and it created more unrest between the Greek city-states themselves. In fact, after the Greco-Persian Wars, there were wars within the Greek culture, Greek city-states against each other, and that paved the way for conquest by this Macedonian culture from the north, and the first empire based on Greek culture, that of Alexander the Great. So the next section is called Alexander in the Hellenistic Era. Alexander was one of the great stories, really, of the classical period. He was a Macedonian who became the ruler of Greece when his father, who conquered it, died. He was still in his 20s, and when he became the ruler of Greece, he went off and conquered Persia and kept going, creating one of the largest empires in history. If you look here on this map, the black outline is the extent of Alexander's empire. So here's Macedonia, here's the original Greek culture that his father Philip conquered, and then Alexander set off and conquered Persia, Egypt, more of the Middle East, all the way towards the Indus Valley in India. This empire fell apart when Alexander died at the age of 33. The main significance of this empire is that it spread Greek or Hellenistic culture. In fact, the time after his death is called the Hellenistic era because Alexander imported the Greek culture to these lands that he conquered, with cultural and political significance for each region. As you read this section, look for examples of this influence and its effects on Egypt, Persia, India, and beyond. In the next section, the book compares Rome and China. The Chinese and Roman empires had similarities and differences in how they formed, their methods of imperial administration, and the reasons for their collapse. Starting with Rome. Early in its history, the citizens of Rome overthrew a monarch and established a republic which was influenced by Greek culture. It was this state that began to build an empire, shown in green here, and this empire was created a little bit at a time in small chunks, usually in an attempt to protect the people living on the outskirts. Unlike Alexander, the Romans did not set out to conquer the world. The creation of the Roman Empire took centuries, from about 500 BCE to 100 BCE. The bigger it got, the harder it was for the Republic to last. By 27 BCE, Caesar Augustus was the first emperor of Rome, initiating a period of peace that we call the Pax Romana. And this did have major significance in the region. So that section is kind of about how Rome was founded as an empire. The book then turns its attention to China and says that, following those early civilizations in China that you read about in chapter 3, the dynasties fell apart into a series of smaller states. We call this the Age of Warring States, and it bothered Chinese leaders and thinkers who really preferred order and harmony. So Qin Shi Huangdi unified China in 221 BCE, and that is shown in this kind of, if you look here, this red outline is the Qin Empire or Qin Dynasty. He used very harsh philosophies that we call legalism, which it did focus on order and had extremely harsh punishments to unite China. His dynasty was very short, but the Han Dynasty that followed, which is shown in purple color on this map, ruled for about 400 years and established many political structures that last to this day. In the next section, the book compares the way the Romans and the Chinese consolidated their empires. So this is the section about techniques of imperial administration. And you're looking for similarities and differences in how Rome and the Han Dynasty ruled. And remember, this is the kind of thinking you'll be doing when you write comparison essays. So, some similarities include public works like roads and bridges. Here's an example of the Roman roads in red on this map of the Roman Empire. And for China, we have the Great Wall as an example of public works. And we also have imperial roads shown here in this kind of yellow color. Both of the empires also evoked supernatural sanctions for rulers. They absorbed foreign religions, that's Buddhism for China and Christianity for Rome. There were some differences, including how they treated the diverse cultures they encountered as they expanded, how they used language as a tool of cultural assimilation, and the Chinese use of a Confucian-style bureaucracy versus the Roman emphasis on a legal system. The last section comparing Rome and Han China is about the reasons they collapsed, and there were some similarities. Both of them expanded faster than technology was able to keep up, so they had more and more difficulties administering geographically a larger and larger empire. I mean, this Roman Empire is massive, and really so is China for, over 2,000 years ago. They also had an issue with the increased power of the elite classes and their threats to rule. They had a problem with disease and other environmental issues, and each of them had an issue with nomadic threats on their borders. For the Romans, it was the Germanic-speaking peoples who would eventually conquer the empire up here. And for the Chinese, it was the Xiongnu, shown here in this brown color, who also threatened their rule. The main difference between their collapse is that in China, a dynasty would reunify after the fall of the Han dynasty, and there would be a dynastic tradition in China all the way to the 20th century. But there would never again be a major Western European empire. And this section is going to end with some explanations for why this major difference occurred. The last heading is about India. India's diversity made it more difficult to construct an effective centralized state, though the Mauryan and Gupta empires ruled for a time. In contrast to much of Eurasia, then, India has not had a tradition of long-lasting, strong central empires. And the book will explain several reasons for this, and the most important of those is the incredible diversity of the Indian subcontinent. So the section will review examples of two shorter empires shown on this map. The Mauryan Empire was first, from 326 to 184 BCE. That's orange on this map. And the most kind of famous ruler is the Buddhist ruler Ashoka. These black triangles show these stones he erected throughout the empire as a way of transmitting his cultural philosophy and his Buddhist beliefs. And then after the Mauryan Empire, the Gupta Empire, which lasted from 320 to 550 CE. And you can see it's much smaller. It's shown here by this green outline. So despite its lack of empires, India made great cultural contributions during the classical period, and this will be reviewed in the next chapter. Now for the 10-second spice review. A strength and a weakness of classical empires was the power of the elite classes, which alternately reinforced or challenged the major empires of Eurasia. These empires faced environmental challenges, including disease, that negatively affected populations. As empires expanded, they absorbed or denied foreign cultural traditions, and maintained control by promoting trade and economic integration. Now for the visual summary, we're sort of taking a geographic organization here. So we have Eurasia. The book will talk about West, East, and South. In the West, you have the Persians and the Greeks colliding in the Greco-Persian Wars, and you've got Alexander the Great's empire coming out of Greece. And then later in the West, you have the Roman Empire. In the East, we focus on China, and that will be the Qin and the Han dynasties in that order. And in the south of Asia, we focus on India, and that will be the Mauryan and Gupta empires in that order. That's your Chapter 4 overview. Happy reading!